It might as well be called a political bloodbath. More than 30 ministers have quit Prime Minister Boris Johnson's government. Yet the British Prime Minister rejects calls by the Labour opposition, for example, to call a snap general election. But why are his ministers quitting en masse? Why did they lose such faith in his leadership? Were too many scandals just too much to bear? Or do they believe that Johnson is just not fit to run a country which is going through an economic crisis? Just a few of the questions we'll be asking in this edition of The Spotlight.
What was meant to be a routine weekly gathering of cabinet ministers morphed into something very different. Double mortal blows to the Prime Minister Boris Johnson as his Health Secretary Sajid Javid and Chancellor Rishi Sunak quit their jobs within minutes of each other, handing in resignation letters that make for extraordinary reading. The vote of confidence last month, Sajid Javid wrote, was a moment for humility, grip, and new direction. I regret to say, however, that it is clear to me that the situation will not change under your leadership, and you have therefore lost my confidence too. The Chancellor also took aim at the PM's character. The public, he wrote, rightly expect government to be conducted properly, competently, and seriously.
Nothing's worse for a party than a loss of faith in the character of their leader. And these senior politicians, and let's recognise over a dozen of them have now resigned, are saying it's either Boris Johnson or us. Since Boris Johnson isn't going, they are. They're going to have to sit it out, like Boris, but there can only be one winner, and it won't be the Prime Minister.
Boris Johnson's is a government embroiled in sleaze and scandal for months, from lockdown rules-breaching parties under his roof to porn-watching MP. The latest controversy emerged over this man, Chris Pincher, forced to resign from government over accusations of sexual harassment. But the last straw was when it turned out that despite Number 10's denials, the Prime Minister knew of a past formal complaint against Pincher all along. He appointed him to his cabinet.
I apologise for it. I think in hindsight it was the wrong thing to do. I apologise to everybody who's been badly affected by it.
But that didn't wash with the now former Chancellor and Health Secretary or the dozens of MPs who have already resigned. More defections could be on the way.
There's no doubt that we will see more resignations, with quite a few cabinet ministers not declaring one way or the other. But the realpolitik here is he's lost the confidence of his party. He's lost the confidence of a very large number of people whom he himself appointed, and the public aren't taking him seriously. I like Boris as a friend. I think he's a decent man. But the one thing he doesn't seem to have is good judgment about when to leave.
Whether or not Boris Johnson can survive politically is a question debated by his friends and foes for months. The question now is whether these recent resignations will be the beginning of the end for a prime minister whose leadership is in free fall and as the specter of a new no-confidence vote looms large. Saeed Puriza, Press TV, London.
Well, let me first introduce our guest for this edition of The Spotlight. Shabir Bresby joins us. He's an economic analyst who joins us from London. Also joining us is Mick Napier, activist and commentator who joins us from Edinburgh. Welcome to you both. Let me first start with you, Shabir Bresby, if I may. We're looking at the reasons behind these mass resignations that have taken place, of rocking the government of Prime Minister Boris Johnson. And of course, as you're well aware, it's the Pincher affair, this Chris Pincher, the Deputy Chief Whip, who resigned last week. Do you buy the fact that that is the only reason that you're seeing all these resignations?
Hello, good evening. I'm sitting not very far from the Parliament at this moment, about 20 minutes away. And really, it's an extraordinary situation that's unfolding here in the last 24 hours. I think really, one's got to look at it in context. It's not that what happened with the Deputy Chief Whip, Mr. Pincher, or the sort of catalogue of Mr. Johnson has been well known to have very little affinity with truth historically, when he was the Mayor of London, or throughout his premiership, or prior to it when he sold the lie of Brexit. One of the MPs recently described in the last 24 hours that they are demoralized, distraught, and disturbed, distressed. I would say that the government has been dodgy, disgraceful, and really disreputable. It's that, the two ministers resigning, and over the last 24 hours, we've had about 38 ministers and sort of ministers or secretaries of states who have resigned. Not only that, what's fascinating is that his newly appointed Chancellor, Nadeem Zahawi, is also lobbying for the Prime Minister to resign. It's really quite disgraceful. The whole politics in UK, I think we did a commentary about 4 or 5 months ago where I said that the Conservative Party is a winning machine. They really don't care who the leader is, so long as they are in a position to win. So I think the MPs are now realizing, the Conservative MPs are very clearly realizing that to have Boris Johnson as Prime Minister is probably more dangerous for their own well-being as members of Parliament. So they're abandoning ship at this moment, and also the former ministers are also looking whether they can also become Prime Ministers when Johnson goes. I mean, there's a great metaphor in English which says a fish rots from the head down. So obviously it has been rotting for the last 2.5 years, if you like, since Boris Johnson became the Prime Minister, and it is very clearly becoming that the fish is smelling terribly now, and they have to either get rid of that fish or do something else altogether. And this is where the whole situation arises. As you said in your opening comments, that we've got a crisis taking place where ordinary families are suffering in UK. Nearly 4 to 5 million people go to food banks, and fuel prices up, energy prices up, and the reality is that these shenanigans taking place at Westminster do not impact the people when they're suffering economic pain.
Mm-hmm. Well, Mick Napier, it's really turning out to be a soap opera here, if you really take a look at it in some sense, which is not funny, really. But when you have a chancellor that Johnson elects, and then that chancellor turns against Johnson, what are we looking at here? Are we looking? I mean, there's got to be something bigger picture here that maybe we're not catching on to in terms of the revolt that's taking place, especially when you have a new chancellor that then turns on the PM. How do you assess the situation?
Well, you're absolutely right. It's soap opera, but if somebody had written the script for a soap opera, it would have been rejected by the director as far, far too improbable. A couple of hours ago, there were 20 ministers and junior ministers who'd resigned from the government. Now I think it's just 1 or 2 under 40. It's 38 or 39 now. So this is unprecedented. We've never seen anything like this in British politics. I think we need to look at the surface and then look a little bit beneath the surface. I mean, at one level, most of the crisis can be self-inflicted. That is, an intelligent and a different kind of leader could have avoided them. You know, the promotion of a sex pest, really, what can I say, shocking and horrifying millions of British people who had been unable to say goodbye to their loved ones when they were dying during lockdown because the lockdown was extremely strict. And during this time, Johnson and his friends were ordering people on TV to follow these instructions and then leaving to have a drunken, alcohol-fueled party, violating all the rules. That got through to a lot of people at a very visceral level. And I think we're seeing some of the effects of that coming through in the crisis today. You know, all sorts of dishonesty and shenanigans from Johnson. But you know, who could be surprised? He has a whole history of dishonesty, of being fired from jobs, of being caught on television, of being caught in a phone call, plotting violence against a journalist whom one of his friends was angry at. But I think we do have to go a little bit deeper, because I think some of the probably most of the Tory MPs are very worried about losing their seats. There are many crimes that they consider Johnson has committed, but they all come under one heading. They could lose their seats. And his only real crime for them is losing elections. And he's losing elections by an unprecedented margin, and they're worried about their seats. But it's not just that. I think we look at some of the key spokesmen for the Conservative Party, and you can see that they're very worried. They're using language against their own leader, which we've never heard before. And I think we have to look at not just losing seats, but the crises that are coming down the road for any government in London. Sure. Inflation, strikes, they're preparing for a long drawn out war, a proxy war against Russia, and they feel entering all these crises of a perfect storm that they need a leader whom they can rely on, whom they can trust, and somebody who will inspire confidence among the population. Sure. And Johnson can't do that. So I think taking those two things together, that goes a long way to explaining this soap opera.
We're going to get into some of those issues that you just talked about, really, but this is what Johnson has said so far in terms of the way that he has treated this Shabir Rizvi, and he has said that he has a mandate from the 2019 election to press on. I'm not going to step down, and that's the last thing that this country needs, frankly, is an election. Is it the last thing the country needs, or is it what the country needs?
Sorry, is that for me?
Yes, for you, yes.
Okay, thank you. Look, insofar as elections are concerned, obviously the Labour Party is jockeying to have an election as soon as possible. Whether that happens or not, because within the sort of parliamentary process that we have in the UK is that a leader can be removed and another leader from the same party can be installed, and he can continue until the next election, which is due perhaps just over 2 years from now. So that's an option that the Conservative Party may want to take, because as our commentator earlier said, that the members of Parliament, the 80 majority that the Conservative Party have, potentially a lot of them could lose their seats. So they may want to continue, because as I said, the ethos of the Conservative Party is not ethics, honesty, and all the nice words that Mr. Sunak and Mr. Sajid Javid have used. The reality of the Conservative Party is it's a winning machine. It wants to be in power so that its friends in the city can benefit and the ordinary people become losers. That's the sort of ethos of the Conservative Party. So they will abandon any leader. As I have commented previously, that Margaret Thatcher, who won 3 elections for the Conservative Party over 30 years ago, she was knifed and she was removed while she was Prime Minister. And similar thing happened to Theresa May. Soon after that, Boris Johnson became the Prime Minister because she had a very thin majority to carry on after the election that she called. So the reality is that the Conservative Party may want to put a new face to it, but the tragedy is that in the UK, the Conservative Party has taken the garb of the right-wing elements in society who are in a way very keen for Britain to stay out of the European Union. They're against immigration and the whole host of racist policies that right-wing parties had, and the Conservative Party has taken that on, which appeals to a significant section of the population in UK. Therefore, if there is an election tomorrow, potentially with a new head of the Conservative Party, the Conservative may potentially win election again, because they're very good at winning elections. The Labour Party doesn't have a leader that can really resonate with the public at this moment. So I don't know whether Labour will win if there's an election, but the reality is that the Conservative Party is willing to abandon a leader as and when required, so long as they can continue to be in power.
Sure. Well, I don't know if this is important or not, but it is, in a sense, where we're looking at another, what are we looking at here? The UK Minister for Industry, Lee Rowley, and 4 other members of the government have resigned. I don't know if you were aware of that. So Mick Knapp here. Let's go to the election the 1922 Executive Committee. They're looking for the rules to change in terms of the vote of confidence, of which, as it stands, it cannot be challenged for another year, and it seems like they will be able to do that. So what direction will this now be taken in terms of how it will affect whether the vote of confidence is going to take place, and in what period of time?
It's a very good question. I mean, it's quite useful to look at Boris Johnson as a kind of mini Donald Trump. But the problem for Johnson is that we don't, as our other guest has said, we don't have a presidential system. It's a parliamentary system, and the system now, I think, means that very shortly Boris Johnson will go. He has a huge majority of his party against him or indifferent. His recently appointed Chancellor has just come in the door and has turned on him, taken a political knife out of his pocket, and told him that Johnson has to go, which brings Nadeem Zahawi very close to replacing him, because he's currently the Chancellor. So I think it's impossible for the government to proceed. I mean, how on earth? I mean, you've just mentioned there are an extra four people who've left. It is impossible for anybody to replace 40 odd ministers and junior ministers in the government. So I think the way ahead, just by Johnson insisting on going ahead, has been closed off. If he refuses to go, following the meeting taking place now in number 10 Downing Street, then this 1922 committee has the power to force him to go, simply to vote, and his game is over. And I think that is what's likely to happen.
It can do that.
It can do that, yes.
That they can vote for Johnson to be force him to resign or take that position away from him?
Absolutely. As soon as they call a vote of confidence and Johnson loses that vote, then he's gone.
Once that vote of confidence is called, when will that happen? I mean, they're going to vote on it to happen, but I mean, what length of time?
It could happen very quickly. It's within the gift of the 1922 committee to set the rules. They have, and it's not expected to be used very often, but in this critical situation, they will be trying to prevent a situation where Johnson creates a constitutional crisis. They can call a vote, and then he loses the vote, and then he goes.
Very well. Let me bring in Shabir Rizvi here. Shabir Rizvi, let's get down to business here, because that is what is at stake. I mean, we're looking at the UK economy. We're looking at, obviously, the cost of living crisis, inflation, and the whole host of other challenges, to say the least, and economic crises that the UK is facing. Not that other European countries are not facing. I mean, you need to have a team to handle that. And these are the most extreme circumstances that we're looking at. Forget about the fact that you came out of COVID and you're trying to deal with that, which now you have, obviously, the Ukraine conflict compounding that. How can this happen? How can a team be formed, let alone a leader to be elected, were Johnson to go, to handle all this?
Well, look, this is the sort of a crucial question that I think the majority of the Conservative members of Parliament are weighing up, that even if a new leader comes in, will he be able to manage all the crises that we are facing, that you have quite eloquently listed? The reality is that we have a broken political system here in UK, it appears. And this is becoming very clear with many crises that are on the horizon, which are being faced by the ordinary people. People blame the economic crisis on what's happening with Ukraine and Russia. But the reality is that we've had austerity for the last 12 years, since the last financial crisis back in 2008, 2009. That austerity measures which have been applied really by the Conservatives, they've been in power for the whole of that period. So they can't shy away and say that, it's the Labour baggage that has inflicted pain on the society and on the economy. Okay. It's the Conservative policy.
Let me jump in. I'm sorry to get McNabb here. Final answer here. If you can, under a minute, please, McNabb here. To do the honorable thing, to put the interests of the nation before his own interests, is what the MPs are saying. Do you think that Prime Minister Johnson should resign?
Look, everybody, even his friends, know that honourable and Boris Johnson do not go together. The language that his Conservative Party members are using to describe him is very strong. He's a scoundrel, he's a rascal, he's a liar. And they voted for him because he gave him an 80-seat majority. He managed to sell Brexit and get a huge parliamentary majority, but now he's turned into a fantastic liability. And in terms of confronting the situation of real war, of real massive strikes by railway workers and health workers and teachers, he is not the man to lead the Tory
Very
party.
well. I got to jump in. We're fresh out of time. Thank you so much. It was a pleasure. It went by so quick. Mick Napier, activist and commentator from Edinburgh. Thank you. And Shabir Rizvi, economic analyst from London. Good luck to you all, since you're all in the UK. Thank you so much for your input, both of you. That does it for this edition of The Spotlight. From Mikawa Tagwe and the team, it's goodbye until next time.